My position right now is president of the Canadian Counselling and Psychotherapy Association. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is a project that CAPLA so very kindly acknowledged us for. It's a project that has to do with something that you've been talking about all yesterday during the pre-conferences and all today, this morning, about isn't there a way that we can create a standard across the country that everybody can say, yeah, that's the competencies for this profession. That's what we do at entry to practice level. Isn't there a way of doing that? So we commenced with a project, and we were so fortunate. The Canadian government, Government of Canada's Foreign Credential Recognition Program, funded us to do this project. And while starting the project, it became readily apparent that there wasn't a lot of literature out there to tell people, how do you do this? So the wonderful people at SSHRC and the University of Manitoba said, well, we will partially fund you to study how this project rolled out. So what you are seeing here is just a snippet, just a little bit of what it was that the project did and some of the findings from the research study that accompanied it. So what I did, after meeting so many of you yesterday, and you're just delightful people last night at the social thing with the drinking and the snacking, what a great idea. When I met with you, I noticed that a lot of the things that were really kind of dry and boring and technical and psychometrically, I threw those slides out. But if you want them, I can give them to you. It's just that I'm going to focus on how did we do it? Does it make sense? And I'm going to go by head nods. As soon as I see enough head nods going, oh, I know that stuff. Oh, you don't, oh, stop it. Just go on to the meat. I want to know what's it look like. Then I'll do that for you, right? So I'll just start, and you make sure you give me the head nod so that I know, oh yeah, know that, been there, got the t-shirt, and now I'm out of it. So here's the contextual background. We are so fortunate in the counseling and psychotherapy field because unlike so many other professions, we do not have regulatory colleges right across the country yet. So creating the competency profile for the nation and a national assessment for it is actually a lot more easily acceptable than in some other professions that are tried and true and say, we've done it this way, we've always done it this way, we're going to keep doing it this way because this is the way that we do it. So the background for us is we know that there are a lot of posers out there. We know that there are a lot of folks out there that say, I'm a counselor, I'm a good counselor, and I'm going to do a great job. And the problem is that they can't prove in any way that they have the background, the experience, the training, the education to be able to prove that they do not pose a potential harm to the public. Now that's tenet number one, to get yourself recognized by a government as a regulatory college. So we knew that that's happening out there. And so what's happening across the nation as we speak today is multiple provinces are seeking regulation for the profession of counseling and psychotherapy. Quebec has been at this since 1963. 1965 is when theirs began. And then Nova Scotia, just recently, yay, was the next province to say, yes, we will regulate the practice. And then Ontario has legislation, but has not yet got to the point of regulation. And there are 3 other provinces that are still in process. One of them is New Brunswick, one of them is PEI, and one of them is British Columbia. So there's a lot of goodwill, there's a lot of energy to try and get ourselves to that point of having a single standard of counseling that's agreeable to everybody without having to do that pull and tug, that push me, pull you that Dr. Doolittle had, right, where they're all saying, no, we can agree on this. This is, in fact, what is at the foundation of our profession. And of course, as you know, we have so much migration in our country that foreign-trained or alternatively trained people are having difficulty proving to various employers, to the public, and to regulatory colleges that they, in fact, have got the stuff they need to be able to do the job that they do so well. So this is why we began the process and why now. So right now is where we've got that convergence. We've got everybody working together towards regulation of the profession to protect the public from harm. And we need it to be competency-based because the agreement of internal trade has put itself into a position of having some teeth and is saying, unless you can prove that there's a cultural, linguistic, or harm reason for not being in an agreement, then you should be able to practice from province to province, from territory to territory, without any kind of impediment. Or you should be able to make an objective to show what must that additional piece be that the candidate has to have in order to practice. So that increasing need for the alignment between provinces and territories for our practitioners becomes huge. We have a hugely mobile population just within our own country. And then we have huge immigration happening. So again, foreign trained, alternatively trained, and trained in other provinces and territories all amassed together to get it to a place where we have to say, what is the same instead of what is different? And look at that foundation and say, can we create a fair assessment of those practitioners who are migrating across our country and within our country? And fortunately, the Canadian Counselling and Psychotherapy Association was committed to trying to see if we could do a project that could make that so. I'm a dreamer. In a perfect world, this is what I would love to have. Wouldn't you love it if you began with the National Entry to Practice Competency Framework over here, and every course you ever took had assessments, formative and summative, related to the competencies? And then imagine if when you went into your practicum setting, they were looking for the competencies. And then you graduated, and to get certified, they were looking for the competencies, yes. And then we get to internship and independent practice, and you have a supervisor who's checking on whether or not you should get a salary raise, and that person is looking for the competencies. And we all know them, and the public knows them, and the employers know them. And that means that the public comes in informed to your office and says, isn't that a bit unethical? You can't really do that, can you? Because they're aware, they're informed. The employer doesn't start hiring the cheapest person they can find, or the prettiest, or the handsomest, or the fattest, or the thinnest, or the tallest, the guy with the plaid shirt, the lady with the long pants. They start looking for the people who have the competencies. So how did we do this? We created two tools. The first tool is the actual assessment tool itself for the candidate who wants to enter practice as a counselor or psychotherapist. And it is computer-based, it is bilingual, pan-Canadian, simulation style, and competency-based. Why? Because our country is vast. I'm from friendly Manitoba. It costs me more money to get from where I live to Churchill than it does for me to get from where I live to Kuala Lumpur. I'm serious. So we do not want to have an assessment tool that forces us to go to a specific place at a specific time to do it. We need it to be accessible. So it has to be competency. It has to be bilingual. It's a bilingual country. Has to be pan-Canadian. Has to be simulation style, and I'll explain why in a minute. And it has to be competency-based. Because if it's not competency-based, how can it be a fair, valid, reliable, credible, authentic assessment? It cannot, because our profession is based on competencies. So, why go simulation style? For those of you who know about OSCEs, imagine this. You're very depressed. It's been a bad day. Things are not going well. And your friends can't help you. So you figure, I'll go to the outreach center and I'll see if I can see a counselor. And you're sitting there and you're fidgeting. And you're getting ready to see the counselor. And this nice man comes out. He says, hello, have you had a cup of tea? Come on in. And you start having a conversation. And he finds out about you a little bit. And you find out a little bit about him. And feeling a little calmer now. You've had a little cup of tea. And then you start, and it blurts. It just comes blurting out. You know, oh, a terrible day. Nothing seems to go right. And the person helps you through it. Now imagine an OSCE. You've got 10 minutes. So your simulated patient is depressed and is sitting in the chair, head down. I'm sad. You've got 10 minutes as a counselor with an OSCE to go in there, find out what is the pressing need of this patient, what is wrong, diagnose this, make a treatment plan, and get out of there. And we'll have a checklist and go check, 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 check. Now for medical things, this makes sense, right? People have got a certain issue or concern that brings them to the doctor, and in 10 minutes, they typically work in 10-minute cycles in their practice. Counselors work 50 minutes. We have to build alliance, trust. Can't do that in an OSCE. But you also can't tell anything about somebody's ability to do counseling by giving them a multiple choice test. You would have the equivalent of armchair quarterbacks. Go! Pass! Pass! Go for the long one! But can they actually throw a football? I don't know. Could they actually function as a quarterback? Probably not. So that would be the equivalent of a multiple choice test for the Counseling and Psychotherapy Association, right? You can't do it. You can't do it because it's not authentic. So when most people talk about valid, fair, and reliable, we have to add in credible and authentic for our profession. So that's why this project is done this way, and to help it to align as much as possible with regulatory colleges. But wait, there's more. We did this side, the Vanna White Appeal. This side is the self-assessment done in the privacy of your own home to retain your dignity at your own time frame. You sit down, you take a computer-based, bilingual, pan-Canadian, simulation-style, competency-based assessment that mirrors what you will ultimately have to take for entry to practice. But this is in the privacy of your own home, where you can dither. And you can go, I don't know, I'm not sure, maybe this. Oh, no, I think that, right? Take your time, figure it out. And then, instead of getting a score, what you get is a report. And the report will tell you how you have done in terms of gaps, how you have done in terms of successes. And then it'll link you to those places where you can get education and training for those. I'll describe that in a little bit, too. So far we're doing good. We got head nods, we're good? All righty. So here's a study in a nutshell. It began with describing how a competency profile is created. First thing we learned was not very many people write about this. You can hear about Dacom, you can hear about Spencer and Spencer, but those are proficiency-based, human resources, curriculum-based types of how do you do it. We want competency-based, not a lot written about it. And that becomes the blueprint, of course, for your test. And then we wanted to document the assessment processes, not just in Canada, but in the US and the UK. People who had done this kind of test before and the successes that they had had and how did they do it. And then analyze the results of the work. So there's a whole bit. Now you're seeing the kind of slides I did not keep. Those are the kinds I threw out. So all of this stuff about split half reliability, estimates of error, variance, all of those, if you want those, I can give those to you. But we're going to just stick with the how did you do it, where did you go next, and then what. So we started with willpower. People wanted to make it happen. Step number 1, you have to do a PR job, right? You have to make sure people understand what are you going to do, why are you going to do it, good idea. Those are your subject matter experts. Then you need the stakeholders. Who's going to be affected by this and how do they think about it? Occupational standards. The occupational standards are what people who are not the practitioners think that you do. What you need are the people that do what you do and have those people at the table so that you can create the standards of practice and the scope of practice that exist, and then you have to find the literature that is aligned. So what's the most similar profession to yours, or that has pieces or overlapping scopes of practice with yours that can inform your process that might already have a framework? Okay, so phase 1, how did we create this framework? Well, it turns out that in Canada, the US, and the UK, we all do exactly the same thing. We have 10 steps, and there will be a quiz on this. No. The 10 steps, now if you don't need this, we'll just go whipping through at light speed, because if you've all done this before, then we can just whip through. But in step 1, you identify a facilitator. If that facilitator, by the way, if that facilitator that you think you might want to hire tells you, oh, this is easy, I can do this for you, I do job analysis all the time, you don't want them. Because you don't want a job analysis in a profession like counseling and psychotherapy. That would just tell you what do people do. It tells you nothing about their skills, their knowledge, their attributes, and their judgment, right? Otherwise, you're diminishing your profession. So you don't want that. You want somebody who understands functional analysis. That's what you need. And that expert panel. We have to make sure that sitting at the table are art therapists, music therapists, cognitive behavioral therapists, reality therapists, brief therapists, person-centered therapists. You need to have an amalgamation of a lot of people, including people who say, I've only ever done outreach. That's all I do. That's all I know. That's what I do. And you need other people that go, well, you know, really, it's all about the person and what the client brings to us. And I take my direction from the client. And so you need both ends of the spectrum to come to the middle to say, not what is different from your modality of practice, what is the same? What are the foundational elements without which you could not move forward in your practice without the potential for harm? Okay? So that's what you need. Identify that facilitator and who that expert panel is going to be. Then identify that scope of practice. Like I said, that's that functional analysis piece, right? Knowledge, skills, attributes, judgment, those types of things have to be in there. And then a lit review by an expert panel that says, oh, you know those pastoral counselors, they've got a really good thing about that. And you know, those social workers, they did a little bit about this. Oh, the psychologists, they have a thing about this. And oh, you know, the psychiatric nurses, they have a piece on something. Oh, those people in what is the name of that place? New Zealand. I just saw penguins in my head. I'm sorry, it just distracted me for a minute. So those literature review pieces that you can say, oh, this is good. Oh, no, that's way out there. That's way too zen for us, you know. And then move your way through it. Then fourth, you need to identify what are those competency areas, the big pieces, right, the big clumps. And then the group divides up into smaller working teams. Hopefully, teams that don't have the same kind of modality bent to them. So you want to have somebody who's involved with cognitive behavioral therapy, sitting with somebody who's very gestalt. And you want somebody who's very person-centered to be sitting with somebody who does play therapy. You want the pastoral counselor working with the counselor who works in prisons, right? You want diversity in those small groups, and that's what creates your sub-panels. And then they begin to describe what are those competency indicators? What are those descriptions, discrete descriptions of the form, the function, the issue? So if you look at it this way, you get those specific modalities of counseling that those experts know so well, and they send it through a filter, through a sieve, if you will, to look at what are those main generic domains that exist in every single modality of their practice. So in our case, things that are foundational principles, ethics, standards of practice that have to do with record keeping, reporting, those kinds of things. Professional practice, counseling processes, those kinds of things. And then it goes into a finer filter after that from those domains to what are the indicators within those domains. So what are those specific competency things that if you saw them, heard them, tasted them, touched them, you'd recognize and go, ah, that, my friend, is competency B2 3.4. And you go, oh yeah, I think we've done it, right? So once you've got all of those pieces, then you create that competency profile. That's all of those big pieces with the little domains coming under and then the indicators under them. And you review it, you finalize it, and this is like a modified ANGOF at that point in time. You know, you have to work really hard with the team to make sure that they're not too invested in their own writing because it's going to change. You're going to have to synthesize it so it all sounds like it's coming from the same writer and so on. So once you've reviewed it and you've finalized it, that's the point at which you're ready to validate it. And so what you do is you begin a validation process. We did it online, where what you do is you check the frequency and the importance. And it is only those indicators that hit frequency and importance that get contained and retained into the framework, with one exception when it comes to counseling, and that has to do with suicidality. Because although it's less frequent, it's critically important, right? So there are times when that rule gets adjusted. But typically speaking, you go through this validation process, and then once you have finished that piece, then you go into the publication of it, and you send it out for feedback from everyone. Now, in between all of this, between steps 8, 9, and 10, you're talking to your stakeholders, right? You're doing a minor, let's check this out with trusted individuals that we know can look at it and give us positive feedback before it goes really, really wildly public, right? Now, in our case, what happened was the folks in British Columbia created the framework, and then the people in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and BC then got together and then validated it, and then it went right across the whole country. And it was CCPA that said, okay, let's do this through a huge platform where anybody can come in and go out, and then we'll tabulate the results. And what we found was there was nothing in the framework that got thrown out. It was spot on. And we got all sorts of comments from all sorts of people that were very encouraging, all different walks of life, all different parts of the country, all agreeing that this is, in fact, the foundation of what the counseling and psychotherapy field is in Canada. So that's where you start. And that becomes the blueprint for your exam. So what the people who were creating this said when interviewed was, be very careful about the difference between competency and proficiency. Proficiency is how well you do something. Competencies are not interested in how well you do it. It's binary. Do you have it? Do you not? If you do not, that means there's a potential for harm. So, binary. And there's an absence, as I said, of literature-based products. There's not a lot of people that write about this, to tell about this, to inform you, so that there's a cadre of folks out there who can help you create these. And there's nobody describing the development process until July of this year. So there was nothing. Then there were content-based themes. All of the people involved in Ontario and in BC that were involved in this particular study said the capacity of the competency profile to increase the likelihood of regulation was high, because it would prove to governments that we were, in fact, a single profession and that there were a lot of us. And that means that if there's a potential for harm in one province, what is it about any other province that's not regulating that profession that makes everybody safe there? Seems like an interesting concept. And there was the capacity to reduce the likelihood of significant differences in those competencies, something that a lot of people were talking about this morning, about different standards, right? If you all agree that this is the profession and the foundation of the profession, well then, doesn't it make sense that the capacity of the competency profile to lift the level and everybody to see the level and agree to it is enhanced? And lastly, that linkage between the competency indicators and future assessment protocols to recognize that those competencies, while good and wonderful, also had the added value of being the blueprint for a competency assessment. So, what do I mean, a competency-based assessment that is simulation style? Ooh, it's fun. And why choose that kind anyway? I think I gave you a little taste of why. But if you look here at Miller's assessment pyramid, you'll see that this part, the nose stuff, that's that armchair quarterback stuff, right? These are your multiple choice tests, your essay written tests, your factual tests. It's when you get into this knows how competency and shows how performance that you're actually starting to look at the competencies themselves. So these are the vignette-based written test case study approaches. We threw these away because we realized people whose first or second language was not English or French would have more difficulty. People who had reading disabilities, more difficulty. Were we trying to test their ability to read the vignette, or were we testing their ability to perform at an entry to practice level in our profession? So we threw those out. And the does part, the apex of the pyramid, we have covered off because we have supervised practica, we have supervised internship. Remember, no one assessment tool can do everything. Don't ever be fooled. All this assessment that I'm showing you does is give you one snapshot of somebody's ability to practice in a way that reveals that they have the competencies for the entry to practice. You're still going to need that training, that instruction. You're still going to need practice. You're still going to need a practicum. You're still going to need a supervisor. You're still going to need that internship, consultation, all of those things. And so some of the competencies that have to do with discrete things like personal hygiene, you can't test on a test like this. Best observed in practice. So those things that are best observed on the competency framework are the things that go onto this kind of an assessment, simulation style. But some of the other pieces, you don't drop them. That's when alternative forms of assessment take place, right? Okay, so the competency profile is the blueprint for the assessment. And the commonly occurring mental health concerns in Canada are the anchor points for what are the simulations going to be about that relate to the blueprint. Make sense? And together, that's what's going to make it authentic, reliable, valid, fair, and credible. Okay, are you ready? So what does it look like? Well, here's a dry run. This is an example. This is not a full simulation, and it's not taken from the test. It's just a sample, so you can see how it works. All the simulations are aligned to the competency statement, and they're all based on authentic situations. And the full assessment is addressing the legal requirement of regulatory colleges to have an examination, among other assessment strategies. And this is one part. You can see how cautious I am about this, right? It's really near and dear to my heart that whenever I talk to people about an assessment, that they understand that it is one piece of a very large pizza pie, right? Okay, so this includes the candidate's prior learning, the supervised practica, continuing education, supervised internship, quality assurance. Do not throw out the baby with the bathwater, in other words, right? You want to make sure that you have a whole assessment so that everybody's got the best opportunity to show you what they know and what they can do. So there are 10 simulations. Think, you know those books when you were a kid, those choose-your-own-adventure books, where, you know, you choose, ooh, I'm going to choose B, I'm going to B. And then they'll say, go to page 10. Okay, Page 10. Okay, now you read page 8. Ooh, do I decide this or do I decide that? Well, it's page 12 or 22. 22, right? Depending on where you wanted the story to go. Think that way when you're looking at this. 5 to 8 sections per simulation. It begins with a very short scenario. In other words, the client comes in the room. The client is male, the client is female, the client, just enough so that you've got a sense of who just walked in that room authentically. Then, information gathering. As a practitioner, what do you need to gather to be able to figure out what is the need? What brings you here today? And then decision making. What are going to be those therapeutic judgments or decisions that you have to make? So, underneath it all, unbeknownst to the unwary test taker, every single one of those options that they have on the test is calibrated. It's calibrated +3. Awesome. You are Mother Teresa. You are the best thing that ever happened to the counseling profession. Down to -3. This is life-threatening. This is job-ending. This is your client may never come back again to you or any other counselor. So as you can tell, most of the assessments are +2s to -2s. It's pretty severe to get a -3, right? The most obvious one would be if you miss indicators for suicidality and you just keep on marching through. That would be a -3. There are some that are 0s. They don't contribute to client care, but it doesn't cause any harm. We try to avoid those. But every single option in the test is calibrated in that way using a modified Angoff strategy with the test developers. Remember, the test developers, multiple modalities, pan-Canadian, right? Also, they had to be entry to practice themselves, counselor educators, people in midlife crisis, people who are male, people who are female, people who have only ever lived in the North, people who have only lived on a coast, etc. That way, the calibration process gets to be a really interesting conversation. So here's the sample. Lucia. So you're a therapist in a group private practice. This is your first meeting with a new client. On her intake form, Lucia has indicated that she's 32, recently separated after 7 years of marriage, has 2 school-aged children. Her family doctor has suggested she try psychotherapy to address what he described to her as early signs of depression. And then the computer screen will tell you, go to section A. So you go to section A. In your first meeting with Lucia, what information would best assist you in determining potential directions for therapy at this time? So you look at the options and you go, I can select as many as I want. Well, how about if I see how aware she is? She's reflective and articulate. Well, that tells me a little bit of something about where I might go with her. And does she have any aches and pains? Oh, she's got minor aches and pains there. How about what brings you here today? Well, she's sad, she's got no energy, she's got trouble sleeping. So as you can see, every time you choose something, you get to learn something more about the client that just walked in. So you're building the story as you go. How about prior mental health treatment? Got no history, right? So all of them have got a latent image that appears as soon as you select them. But here's where the authenticity comes in. As soon as you click it, you can't go back. You can't unclick it. It would be like saying, so I hear your father beats you, right? Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, suck that back in, right? You can't do that. So it's authentic to the situation. If you say something that you ought not to have said, whether it's heinous, like what I just said, or something that's just quite mild, then that's out there, just like it would be out there on the table with your counselor, with your client. So what's happening underneath all of this is each of these pieces are related to the competencies that have to do with your practice on intake. And so what you're seeing here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different competency statements in a context that's authentic being assessed at the same time. Go to section B. At the conclusion of your first meeting, what options would be indicated? You've got a whole array there. Now, how did we come up with the array? This is where your subject matter experts are so wonderful. They know that when a client comes in, your head explodes with ideas of what might be happening, where you might be heading. And all of those thoughts, where they go, are what you see as the options. Very unlike multiple choice, because all of these are possibilities. But what makes the counselor who has the entry to practice competencies is which ones they toss away. That wouldn't be appropriate at this time. That wouldn't be appropriate with this client. Knowing I'm in session 2, I can't do that yet. I still don't know information about this, so I can't make this assumption. So all of those competencies are being captured here. So let's say you referred her to the medical doctor. Well, that competency, believe it or not, does not have to do with referral at all. That competency has to do with listening to your client. She just told you she came from the doctor. Why would you send her back to the doctor? The doctor referred her to you, right? Maybe you want to offer individual therapy. If she shows some interest, she might like that. How about provide a brief explanation about experience and expertise with presenting problems? And she feels reassured. So for everything you pick, there's an answer. And again, what's happening? What's happening is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different competency areas are being assessed in the context of other competencies, which is how they work. They don't work discrete pockets. They work together. So then you get to section 3. Do you want me to go a little faster? Have you had it? Right? Session 3, you prepare for the next session. Which of the following actions do you plan? Let's say you want to establish treatment issues, establish short-term, etc. And you can see each time you got it, and each time it's referring. Now remember, every time they pick one of these, they're getting a mark. +3, +2, +1, 0, -1, -2, -3. +3, minus, So we're going to have, after 10 simulations, at least 500 data points. And we're going to be able to check and recheck the same competencies in different settings. Do you know how to do this with a child? Do you know how to do this with a woman? Do you know how to do this with somebody who's very shy? Do you know how to do this with somebody who's highly nonverbal? So we can check and recheck in different contexts to see, do you transfer it? Do you not transfer it? Is it solidly in place? Is it not? So you just keep on going through there until you get to the point where you have finished, right? Choose only one. You're in the termination. She finishes. So you have 5 to 8 sessions in each item, and you have 10 simulations per test. 9 are scored. The 10th one is a pilot for the next exam, right? Just like the LSATs and the SATs and all those other tests. You never know which multiple choice item is yours and which is not, right? So that's how we keep it robust and keep it rolling and in development so that we can reduce the costs for the candidate who has to take the test. So there you have it. That's how she works. And that's exactly how the self-assessment will work, except when you finish this, and it's your assessment for entry to the regulatory college, you're going to be finding out what did you score on information gathering, on decision making. You're not going to get a score on how did you do with each competency area necessarily, unless the regulatory college informs us that that's what they would like. But on the self-assessment, that's all you get. You get no score. You get a report. And the report is automatically generated with the software. As soon as you finish, the report gets generated and it's on your screen. And it says to you, here are your gap areas. Here are your strength areas. Here are places you can go for training, further information. Here are where your nearest test centers are. Here's where, you know, all those kinds of things. So what did you just see? You just saw the 5 areas that are in the competency profile, just in that one simulation, which was not a complete simulation, 3 of the 5. Then, of the 25 sub-areas, you saw 12 of them being assessed. And of the 130 competencies, you saw 27 in one simulation. So, each assessment, 10 sims. Each sim, multiple competencies, each response, calibrated, +3, -3. It is impossible to pass the assessment by selecting all because of the calibration. And it is impossible to skip the questions because it's a computer. You can push all you'd like, but you're not going to get the next screen, right? Okay. So, 10 sims, more than 500 data points is what you've got. It tells you areas of strength, weakness, or lack of knowledge. It distinguishes between abilities in information gathering and decision making. And in those 5 to 8 sessions, we're able to look at approximately 70% of the competencies. We're omitting those that are best assessed through a different milieu than this. And then it ensures that contextualized knowledge, skill, and judgment. And none of them are done independently. They're all done interdependently. But what about that self-assessment, right? You said you had a self-assessment. So it's in the privacy of your own home, so long as you have internet access, right? Because it comes to you on a platform. There are approximately 3 simulations, because as you saw from that one simulation, you can access an awful lot of those sims very quickly. All of those competencies within the sim very quickly, excuse me. And that means that within 3, we can pretty much, so long as we don't have to give a score and it's not high stakes, we can tell you where those gap areas are. We know where the strength areas are. And that immediate auto-generated report will give you those links to education training opportunities, some of which would be online. Some might be another group of people that offer a whole cadre of things, of webinars perhaps, courses, continuing education, all sorts of things that gear their courses or their training to that particular competency area. Links to next steps in test taking, particularly for those people that score very well, and of course links to helpful information sources. Additionally, they get practice taking the test, right? How does this feel? Do I feel more comfortable now? I don't have to emigrate first to check it out. I thought I was trained in my country, but here I sit in my little basement, and I can type out what I think is happening and go, oh my gosh, I have the competencies for what I do right now, but not what they want in Canada. And so they give a good sense of where they're going. So that's why we did the way we did. This is, believe it or not, the way in which you develop the test. How do you do what you just saw? And again, it's another 10-step model. I'm going to whip through it quickly so that I can answer questions, because I think we finish at 3:30, right? So identify that testing format, facilitator, and the test development team. We selected computer-based, simulation-based, and we needed a psychometrist, and we needed somebody third party. So although my background is in educational psychology, we made sure we had a third party who was looking at it without knowing us, without knowing anything, to take a look at the stats so that we were sure that the statistics were completely objective, that I hadn't missed anything, that they hadn't missed anything, that both reports aligned. Then we did some research into the competency profile to make sure that everybody understood not just what the wording was, but what the intention of each of the items on the competency statement were. So we asked people who actually created the competency assessment to come in and help us with that piece. And we did research on what are the most commonly occurring mental health issues in Canada today. And every 3 years, we do that same research over again to see if there's any changes, so that we're sure that our simulations are authentic to what is likely to come through the door for the entry to practice practitioner. Then we train the team on simulation development. How do you create that movie script for the whole story? What's the whole story going to look like? Where could somebody go wrong? Where could somebody go right? And how do you move your way through it? How do you understand all of the psychometrics underneath it so that you understand what making a decision about this piece will do to this piece down here, right? So the team gets trained not just in how do you develop the words, the content piece, but also what's happening underneath the test and how do you justify it. So it's insufficient to say, it's this competency, and I think it's worth this, and everybody around the table agrees with me that's what it is. You also have to say, why? So we have a table of justifications that say this is disrespectful to the client, or this is very respectful of the client, or this is potentially dangerous. This is potentially a quick route to an answer. So it's justified as well. And then we go into small writing groups to build our stories and get creative. And then they create the simulations. We have an online secure platform, so we don't always have to be face-to-face to do this. We meet in small groups, online, Skyping, emailing, all on a secure platform so that it can't go anywhere else, right? That's a critical piece, has to be secure. And then step 6, it comes back to the large group, and the large group begins massaging it, editing it, making sure that it's accessible to everybody regardless of what modality of counseling or psychotherapy they do. And then step 7, we select them. We review their alignment to the blueprint. We said we were going to go 30% on this test for this, 30% on this, 30% on that, 10% on this. Have we done that? Yes, we have. And then one last check to make sure we're covering off the competency profile at an appropriate level. Then we beta test it. Again, online. We have test centers where we secure the seats. People go volunteer to sit, write the test. They give us the feedback right there. There's a notation button right on the screen. So at the time in process, we get their feedback as well as after the fact. We then analyze those beta results, and that's when we do another modified Angoff check just to make any adjustments that we noticed once we had candidates actually writing the test, and then bingo, we're done. So what did everybody tell us about that? Well, they said one of the keys is the importance of having subject matter experts. You have to have somebody who's not a subject matter expert who's going to be the shepherd, and then you're going to need all these subject matter experts to bring their expertise to the table. The competency profile has to be the foundation. And then the use of templates. They said without the use of templates, they would have been going back and forth all the time to make sure that the writing style was the same. Otherwise, it would sound like a different person had written each simulation, and that would have been really confusing for the test taker. So templates were used to ensure that stylistically and structurally, all of them looked the same, even though the simulation context was completely different. Then, some challenges. Computer technology is able to detect overlaps in a way that we could never have done individually. This test is not possible without having a computer software program underpinning it, giving us all of those calibrations, making all of those psychometric analyses for us. And then we also noticed that there was a modality-based disagreement from time to time. And we had to wrestle that one to the ground and say, are you disagreeing with that because, or do you just not like it? And then once you wrestle that to the ground, oh, so in your province, the age of consent is this? Okay, that simulation is out the window. Can't use it because somebody from that province would think differently than everybody else. Oh, I see. In your province, counselors are allowed to do that kind of diagnosis. Ah, well, in this territory, they can't. So guess what? That piece, out. So it had to be consistent with everybody, pan-Canadian. They get to be really fun, exciting times, let me tell you. And then there were two really observed differences in the Canadian group versus the American and the US group. The Canadians, they talked it through more. I know that sounds kind of corny and Canadian-like, but really, I had somebody else, a research assistant, come in and observe so that there was no bias of any kind. And she said exactly what is posted, that there was increased collaboration between and during meetings. It didn't matter that you told me to sit in this group of 3. I'm not sure, so I'm going over to this group, and I'm going to check with them, and then I'm going to come back, and I'm going to tell them what I found out from them, like spies, right? What are you doing? What are you doing? And that didn't happen in the US and the UK. Never saw that there. Only saw that in Canada. And of course, in Canada, we develop in both languages. So some of our simulations are built in French, and then are translated into English. And some are built in English and translated into French. And then the people who are at the table who have French as a first language are working with other people who are bilingual, so that we've got the ability to have full and open conversation throughout the entire process. So I think I should probably stop there